The entire globe is today the site of a momentous conflict. As each side attempts to prove to the world the superiority of its position, the conflict is fought with the words of diplomats, with gestures of friendship and help to uncommitted countries, even with cultural demonstrations. It is fought indeed on every level of man's experience, for the stakes are high. As one of the adversaries in the conflict, we see a challenge as great as any in our historic past. A challenge not, we hope, to be met and joined in battle, but to be faced and fought in the hearts and hopes of men. It is the challenge of ideas.
Do you know who never seems to use a Jedi mind trick or cause distress to other people?
Darth Vader.
Any of the Sith, I think.
Even whenever he uses the Force to harm people, doesn't he like choke somebody?
Yeah,
with the Force?
The general, I think. Guy in uniform got choked for questioning his loyalty to an outdated religion.
He lacks faith.
And Darth Vader found that disturbing.
He was disturbed. Yeah, Vader was disturbed. It's still a tort, what Darth Vader does. It's just not a mental tort. It's a physical tort.
No, that's quite physical.
Right. Strangling is not mental, it's physical. So even though he uses the Force to commit a tort, it's not a mind trick, it's a choke.
Yeah, straight up duress, the old-fashioned way. Make someone do what you want by beating it into them.
Right, but it's still using the Force to commit a tort, right?
Right.
So, equity requires that we apply the law to all parties and not play favorites, right? So we can't play favorites with regard to Jedi and say, oh, well, they're ostensibly good, so therefore we should overlook their first strike mind tricks. No, I mean we should hold them accountable for their mind tricks if it's tortious.
And in fact, they're so trained at what they do, we should hold them to a higher standard.
So is that like Jedi malpractice or Force malpractice?
You know what? That's a good point. I mean, you have to go through a full set of training to become a Jedi. There's got to be some sort of criteria to become one. You have to start at a certain age. It seems like there's a licensing, so maybe they're professionally licensed individuals.
Should we do like an intro?
Yeah. Good day, everyone. My name is Nima Ashtiani, and you are listening to Jurisfiction.
My name is Adam Kirshner, and Jurisfiction is a conversation about whether real laws apply to fictional characters or circumstances.
And we're discussing Star Wars today and the use of Jedi mind tricks and the legality behind warping someone's mind to do something that you want. Looking at the movies, it looks like it actually happens quite a bit.
So here's the issue. We want to think that Jedi Knights they're noble, what they do is right, and they're trying to protect the best interests of the galaxy, right? Like the members of the galaxy, the individuals in the galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
But when they use a mind trick, is that really a tortious act? Are they committing a tort by mentally manipulating someone else? We have concepts like these in tort law, at least in the United States, but it should be common, in most legal systems, if not all legal systems, where infliction of emotional distress or invading the integrity of a person, causing harm to the person, it's actionable, right, by the victim.
And not just that, it could even be criminal.
Could be criminal also, right, depending on the level of activity and the violation that occurs.
Now, by tort, you mean like every time they use it, a delicious pastry appears?
That would be a good thing, right? Good problems? Like if a delicious pastry occurs every time someone uses a mind trick, I mean, I think our conversation is done, right? Like we should try to trick people as often as possible. No, I mean, like a tort is an injury caused to a victim.
Right.
Simply put, whether real or intangible, economic, physical, it's an injury caused to a victim.
I understand now. I get them confused all the time.
Yeah, Your Honor, I'm guilty of baking pastry.
I am guilty of a tart.
We were discussing whether Jedi mind tricks are tortious acts.
Yes.
In which case, the Jedi mind tricksters would be tortfeasors, right?
Right.
They would be defendants, and if they were sued by the victims, they should be found liable for the torts that they commit.
And ironically, and I think you and I were talking about this before, it seems like a lot of their victims are generally bad people that tend to get their minds played with.
Well, they're bad people, but just because you're a bad person doesn't mean that you waive your rights, right? Like you can't just go up and stab a bad person just because they're a bad person, right? Like that's still a tort and a crime. It's both.
You gave up your right to think on your own when you
Right.
committed your acts.
That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works, right? Like, just to use an example, right? Just because Jabba is holding all of Luke's friends captive, whether encased in carbonite or chained to his throne or, wherever they're being held captive, doesn't mean that Luke can just show up and start committing torts.
Self-defense
Right.
and defense of others.
Well, so self-defense is the second strike Jedi mind trick. But that's not what happens, right? He shows up and he uses a first strike Jedi mind trick against Bib Fortuna, right? Just cold calls Bib Fortuna. He's like, hey, you're going to take me to Jabba right now. I must be allowed to speak. And he causes emotional distress for Bib Fortuna. He manipulates Bib Fortuna's mind. He enters Bib Fortuna's mind, or weakens at least Bib Fortuna's mind so that he is susceptible to the suggestion that Bib will take Luke to Jabba and allow him to speak. A second strike is if you are responding to someone else's actions, and a first strike would be if you are initiating the action between yourself and a second party.
Do those who have their minds tricked, do they realize it? Can you think of any point in any like the movies or shows or anything like that where someone gets the mind trick done to them or is forced to do something they don't want to, but realizes it, like, oh, I didn't want to take you to see Jabba because I know he's going to throw me in the Rancor pit for this, but I can't help myself.
There's at least like 3 classes. We'll take Watto as an example of one class. We'll take the Stormtroopers as an example of the second class.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, there's the Daniel Craig Stormtroopers, and then there's the other Stormtroopers back in New Hope, and we can distinguish those. And then there's also like Bib Fortuna, so potentially 4 different classes actually.
Yes, and I believe he's dolphin safe.
Right. In Watto's case, Qui-Gon attempts to manipulate Watto,
Mm-hmm.
and Watto picks up on it. Qui-Gon fails his attempted Jedi mind trick against Watto. Right? It's an attempt to commit a tort, but it does not succeed. Watto is aware that he is a potential victim
Mm-hmm.
of a Jedi mind trick, and he prevents Qui-Gon from succeeding. Or he's just like per se incapable of being tricked, potentially. So that's one category.
So can he do anything to Qui-Gon for the attempt?
Well, so that depends on our actual theory of what a Jedi mind trick is when we describe it in a tort, right? Whether it's infliction of emotional distress, whether negligent or intentional, or whether it's assault. It could be a form of assault. So you can attempt... Can you attempt assault? I think you can attempt assault.
Attempt a battery. Assault is you put someone in reasonable apprehension. You don't have to physically touch them, but like even running up in someone's face, if they think something's going to happen, that's your assault. You don't have to touch them. But it would be a battery, I think, right?
So it could be attempted battery, or it would be an assault, right?
It would be an assault if the person was...
If you reasonably apprehend immediate harm. You don't actually have to sustain the immediate harm.
Right.
It's causing fear that is the tortious act underlying assault.
So then we'd have to look at, was Watto terrified?
Could be. I mean, we don't know.
Well, he seemed pretty brave about it. He was like, yeah, that's not going to work here.
Right, but I don't know if necessarily everybody in the Watto class would know about that. And we can circle back to this with the stormtrooper from episode 7, right? Because that stormtrooper seemed to pick up on it. That stormtrooper might have felt fear until Rey succeeded in performing the Jedi.
Oh, sure.
In that case, it would have been assault. If it's an initial attempt and it does not completely succeed, in the case of Rey, the victim could start to feel the sensation and think, well, what's happening to me, right? It could cause fear, in which case it would be assault.
And yeah, and that's the thing. Like as soon as they touch their brain and someone even for a second goes, uh-oh, something's wrong, that could be
Right.
enough.
Could be. So those are I guess 2 of the 4, right? There's the Watto who picked up on it and it did not succeed.
Mm-hmm.
There's Rey and the Stormtrooper who picked up on it and it initially did not succeed, could have caused fear, and then eventually Rey's attempt did succeed. And then we have at least 2 other categories.
We did the first 3. We did 7. So it's the 2 from the original Star Wars. It was the Stormtroopers on Tatooine.
Oh, okay, yeah. So in A New Hope, it's Luke and Obi-Wan and C-3PO and R2-D2.
Mm-hmm.
They show up in a Land Cruiser, and they're stopped by a group of stormtroopers. The leader of the stormtroopers, asks to see the identification. So Obi-Wan says, we don't have to see his ID. These aren't the droids you're looking for. He can go about his business. And it works, right? The stormtrooper, at least to whom the mind trick was directed, did not pick up at any point.
And he just says, move along.
Right. I would categorize that as a second strike mind trick. So the stormtroopers seized Obi-Wan, Luke, and the droids. And in response to the seizure, the military seizure, right? That was a military act, stopping Obi-Wan and Luke and the droids. As a second strike, Obi-Wan uses the mind trick, and conceivably it does not cause fear because it was performed so perfectly.
I don't know if I agree that that would be a second strike, because he may have known that they were looking for those droids, but were they in any direct threat at that moment? Or
it was imminent.
But I mean,
but it was not direct. It was indirect.
But would it have been more of a second strike if Obi-Wan says, "Yeah, maybe these are. What's the big deal?" And then they pull the guns on them, and you go, "Okay, you know what? Don't shoot us." And then they put the guns away.
Well, but even showing a weapon without necessarily pointing it at somebody is a use of force, right?
Did they have it in their hands, or was it on their? It was in their arms, right?
Yeah, I don't think that they were trained on Obi-Wan and Luke and the droids, but they were carrying in their hand, they were carrying their weapons. And therefore that is a use of force. It's a low-level use of force, but it nevertheless is a use of force.
So Obi-Wan, in fear of his and Luke's and the droid's safety, defensively used his Jedi mind trick to allow them to pass then.
Yeah, they were seized by a group of military personnel who were displaying a use of force. I mean, I can understand why someone would push back and say, well, that is a first strike, but I'm comfortable with calling that a second strike mind trick, a defensive mind trick, because of the seizure by military personnel.
I mean, so I raised the other side just because I could see where there's a little bit of a gray area too, where they're being questioned. You don't know if anything's going to happen yet. You don't know if these guys know what the droids look like. If Obi-Wan just says, "No, these aren't them," what if the guy just went, "All right, thanks," and let him go? I didn't think that the harm or danger was imminent. I'm sure he was contemplating it. And we know from watching the movie that it was going to be an issue, but in a general, if somehow this happened in your backyard, I think it would be a little bit more to it before we went straight to there'd have to be more fear, or the guns would have to be raised because they're carrying it in their hands, but officers are typically armed, military people are typically armed, they have to carry it somehow. So I don't know if having the weapon itself would count as enough to say, that person's in fear, and so he's using it, and it's defensive.
That's fine. I can understand the arguments in either direction that it is a first strike, and therefore presumptively less legitimate than a second strike, and I also understand, and I think I lean more toward categorizing this particular instance as a second strike mind trick, which is presumptively somewhat more legitimate because it is justified in theories of self-defense.
Well, sure, and I mean, we should also put in perspective that you do this from the lens of a pro-Ghost advocate.
Well, I don't want to come across as necessarily pro-Jedi, right? Because I was the one who suggested these could be characterized as Tortious acts. I guess we've covered 3 types of victims.
Right. What was the?
Let's segue to the 4th one. Bib Fortuna.
Yep, Bumblebee Tuna.
Bumblebee Tuna. Yeah. Right. So he is susceptible to Luke's mind trickery, and it goes on, right? Like it's not like it's an immediate altercation. It is a protracted altercation, right? So Luke shows up and he says, "You will take me to Jabba now." And so Bib Fortuna takes him to Jabba, right? Like they relocate while Bib Fortuna is susceptible to the mind trickery, and it keeps going.
That was a lengthy walk, wasn't it?
It was a long walk, and they showed up, and they show up in Jabba's throne room, and it keeps going. Luke says, "I must be allowed to speak," and so Bib says to Jabba, "You must allow him to speak," something to that effect. And it's at that point that a third party, Jabba, informs Bib, the victim, "You weak-minded fool, you're being manipulated by a Jedi with his mind trick. You're a victim."
Yeah.
Right? So that would be distinguishable from the others. I guess so Watto realized he was a victim and prevented it. One of the stormtroopers realized he was a victim, attempted to withstand it, but ultimately succumbed to it.
So I have a question for you. We were talking before about assault being put in reasonable apprehension, like if you feel someone's manipulating your mind even for a second, you go, "What's happening?" And then, you black out because your brain is being taken over. Even for a second, you might have something. In the case of
Bumblebee Tuna?
Bumblebee Tuna. Shikaka, if you will. With this one, Jabba the Hutt tells him, "You're being manipulated." So let's say he had no clue from the beginning. Let's say this was one of those perfect mind tricks that there's no period of time from the second he starts it to the second he ends that Bib Fortuna has any idea what's going on. So no reasonable apprehension, right? And then Jabba says to him, "You're being manipulated." And all of a sudden, when Bib realizes it afterward, he gets panicked. Does that count? Can you have assault after the fact? Like, if I stand behind you and I swing my hand at the back of your head, you don't see it, you have no claim for assault. But if someone says, hey, turn around, that guy just swung at the back of your head, does that count? Or since the act is already completed...
Does an assault have to precede the battery?
Does the assault have to...
Right? I mean, like, do I understand your question?
I don't know if precede the battery is what I'm looking for, but can you...
Well, let's go with this, okay?
Okay.
So typically, assault precedes battery.
Yes.
Right, like I raise a fist, you reasonably apprehend that I'm going to use my fist to strike you, that's assault. I strike you, that's battery.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So what if it's backwards, right? What if, say, a boxer, right, like walks up behind the other boxer, raises his fist, but the victim does not apprehend it because he's looking in the other direction.
Mm-hmm.
The boxer punches the victim. That's battery.
That's
It was
straight
not
battery.
preceded by assault. That's just battery.
Right.
The victim turns around and sees an upheld fist. That's assault.
That's assault, right?
And then, say the victim just falls down, right? And so there is no subsequent battery. In that case, the assault would follow the battery rather than precede it.
Right. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I see where you're going. Yes.
So
right.
this would be, to me at least, that describes Bib Fortuna, Luke, and Jabba, right? Bib Fortuna was effectively punched by virtue of the mind trick, but he didn't understand it yet. Jabba told him, you just got tricked by a Jedi. At that point, Bib Fortuna could reasonably apprehend immediate offensive contact by Luke if there were to be a subsequent trick, an attempt to make Bib susceptible to influence. So regardless of whether that ever happens, that's still assault, even though it followed the actual penetration of the mind.
Oh my.
Right? And so therefore that it's still actionable, right?
Yeah. I mean,
the threat of being victimized by a Jedi.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I would agree with that. That the battery would exist no matter what because it occurred.
So we can distinguish Bib and Watto, right?
Yes.
Watto saw it coming, apparently did not apprehend offensive contact because he felt immune to it. And maybe he was. So that would not be actionable, except maybe as attempted battery, if the mind trick actually causes pain.
Right.
Right, if the sensation of being tricked by a Jedi is painful, well then maybe that would be some sort of like attempted battery.
Sure. And yes, Watto was in no way, he brushed it off. He said,
right.
That's not going to work here.
No assault, but maybe attempted battery.
Yes.
Maybe. But then Bib Fortuna would be like the opposite. Battery, yes, if it was painful during the experience. Assault, yes, even though it followed what would have been, if at all, the battery.
Because he was put in reasonable apprehension.
That he would be victimized by a Jedi, even though he had already been victimized and had not realized it yet.
Right.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it. I mean, I don't want it done to me.
Right.
The context of how he put it, I like it.
So, do you want to discuss defenses then for...
Oh, yes, we should go into the defenses.
And whether they apply, right?
Right.
So in New Hope, when Obi-Wan uses it against the Stormtroopers, they were trying to leave Tatooine, which is understandable. They had a goal in leaving Tatooine. It was to rescue Leia and save the galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
So even assuming that the use of the mind trick in that event was unjustified, could it nevertheless be justified because they were trying to save the galaxy and rescue Leia?
That's a great question.
Would you buy it if you were on the jury?
I think if you raise the fact that these stormtroopers, if you're against them, they will kill you. If you're a Jedi, they will kill you. If they're looking for something and you happen to be in their way, they will kill you. I think a jury, a reasonably objective jury, not influenced by the Sith, would...
Not influenced by mind trick.
Not influenced by mind trick, not influenced by the Sith, not influenced by Jedi. I think a reasonable jury would give Obi-Wan a pass in a criminal trial.
Just to clarify, not because of the grounds of saving the galaxy, but because he is persona non grata among stormtroopers, that they would just shoot him on sight if they knew he was a Jedi?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can say, I'm here to save the galaxy, therefore they shouldn't, therefore I was allowed to do that. I mean, that's vigilantism.
Right, and who's to say that you were going to save the galaxy, right? Like maybe that would actually lead closer toward the destruction of the galaxy, for all we know.
Right, that's very subjective. You say, I'm going to save the galaxy, but what are you going to do with it? I mean, what if Palpatine thought he was saving the galaxy by creating the first galactic empire?
Right, so that's a generally bad excuse, right? I was saving the galaxy.
Right, so the excuse of I was in reasonable fear for my life because Stormtrooper may be a good reason to do that then.
Okay. So what about when Luke uses it on Bumblebee Tuna? It's essentially the same fact pattern because much of Return of the Jedi was essentially the same fact pattern as A New Hope, but it's a separate conversation. So again, it's on Tatooine. Luke felt like he had to rescue Leia and Han, and so he had to like save everybody because most of them just showed up and let themselves be captured. And then they were all going to go save the galaxy. So you didn't buy Save the Galaxy with Obi-Wan.
Right. Do
you buy it now, or is that not a legitimate defense?
Still not a legitimate defense. However, he also has a similar defense nonetheless.
But he showed up.
He actively went to them.
Not only that, he broke into Jabba's palace so that he could commit the mind trick.
Yes, he did. But his reason for doing it was to save the life of others. So you're allowed to use force in self-defense or the defense of another. So if you see someone else being harmed or in imminent danger of harm, you can use force to save another person that you see being harmed.
So we're going to have to distinguish Han from everybody else, right? Because everybody else showed up.
Everybody else showed up.
Right? You can't use, oh, well, I have to save Leia because she was in harm. I have to save Chewbacca because he was in harm. I had to save R2, C-3PO because they were in harm. They surrendered themselves to that harm, right? So like that argument doesn't work. But Han
was captured in the carbonite.
And, yeah, he was encased in the carbonite and sold or just given to Jabba. So Han did not render himself to that harm.
Well, wait. Why can't we count the others? Didn't they go to save Han?
So basically, the jailbreak in Return of the Jedi is all based on stacking the deck, right?
Right.
Luke's plan was, I'm going to stack the deck. I'm going to let everybody else get captured so that everything that I need is already inside, right?
Right, that's fair. But it's all stacking the deck still to defend the life of another, to save someone.
Yeah, but you can't volunteer yourself to harm and then use that harm as the justification for you using force to get away from that harm. Like you can't have it both ways.
So you can't victimize yourself?
Yeah, you can't victimize yourself so that you can engage in self-defense. That's illegitimate. So you don't get the self-defense argument with Leia and Chewbacca and R2 and C-3PO. You don't get the vicarious self-defense through Luke for Leia, Chewbacca, R2, and C-3PO because they volunteered themselves to the harm that they were experiencing. But Han's different. He was captured by a third party. He was given to Jabba, and to the extent that he was in harm by being encased in carbonite indefinitely. Is that a legitimate argument for Luke, right? Like, I had to use a mind trick to save Han.
Yeah, I would actually. I mean, if Bib Fortuna gets his mind messed with, he's actually protecting them more in his attempt. He's using the least resistant force, no pun intended, to rescue Han and get him out.
But it's still a tort, right? Like
It is still a tort.
Agreed that is a tort.
You're absolutely right. And so my distinction has to go with the level of the tort in comparison to the threat he's facing. So
you're okay with justifying the means with the ends?
Yes.
It's okay to commit a tort if the commission of the tort leads to something that you perceive as good.
Wait, I didn't say that. I wanted to make sure that it's very narrowed down. Like, for example,
right? I'm putting words in your mouth. So why don't you describe?
You are.
Yeah.
Yes. So
I'll edit that part out. Don't worry. So how do you reconcile the mind trick with the ends of saving Han and escaping with Han?
Sure. So with using the mind trick, it's not going to kill anyone. As far as everyone knows, it doesn't harm them. Bumblebee Tuna and Jabba are not harmed by it in any way. And his right to use it comes from, when we were discussing before, his saving the life of Han Solo, which is you can use like force to defend yourself or defend the life of another, which...
Well, but we discussed that he did. We concluded that he did cause harm to Bib Fortuna. The assault followed the battery.
That was Jabba's fault. Well, so if we look at that in isolation, just that he...
Wait a minute. It's Jabba's fault that Luke used a mind trick on Bib Fortuna? Do I understand that?
It's Jabba's fault that Bib Fortuna realized that he was harmed.
So it's okay to commit a tort so long as nobody tells the victim that the victim was a victim of a tort?
No.
Is that your argument?
No. If Luke just walked in, used the Force, met up with Jabba, and Jabba's like, you just got used, Bib, that in and of itself would be an actionable tort.
Well, that's what happened.
It is, but now it's the reason behind it there's a defense to it. So yes, either way, a thing happened that's actionable, but there's a defense to it. And that defense is, I did it to protect the life of another.
So it's okay to commit a tort out of the blue because that's what happened. It's okay to commit a tort out of the blue if the ends are saving a friend of yours and escaping with a friend of yours.
It's not a yes or no I can give you. I'm going to say sometimes yes, and I think this is one of those sometimes.
Well, why is this one of the sometimes?
Again, it's
because Han's cool. Like it's
because he's just special. See, Luke could have walked up and said, "Hi, I'd like you to give back my friend," and then ended up dead. So he had
But he went there.
He went there to rescue his friend, but there was enough reason for him to believe that he himself would be harmed if he did not use the Force to save his friend, awesome guy, Han Solo.
So I guess we don't disagree about many things here, but I still disagree on that issue. I don't think that saving Han Solo, awesome guy, is a justification for committing the tort of a Jedi mind trick against Bib Fortuna. I think if Luke didn't kill Bib Fortuna would have had a cause of action against Luke for infliction of assault by virtue of the Jedi mind trick. We'd like to hear what you think about the conversation, whether you think saving Han Solo, awesome guy, is a justification for using a Jedi mind trick. We are on Twitter, @JurisFiction1, Facebook, JurisFiction, Instagram, JurisFiction.
You can check out our website. As of now, our new website is up, www.jurisfiction.net, where you can also go back and see our first pilot episode and see any previous episodes. And when we have a new episode up, we will broadcast it here.
Thanks for listening.